Hello and welcome to Lovely English Stories. Thank you for stopping by. This story is written for upper intermediate English learners. Ready? Let's get started. B2 English Story: The Toxic Office. Martina was furious. She had never felt so intensely infuriated. Her blood boiled. She could feel her heart pumping out of her chest, and her hands were uncontrollably trembling. She took herself off to the toilet in a bid to compose herself. She locked the door and took deep, long breaths. What she actually wanted to do was scream at the top of her lungs. She was at the end of her tether. Martina had worked for the same company for the last 4 years. She started working there when it was a team of 5 people, and it had since progressed into a team of over 50. Things were growing and changing fast, and with it, new management started. They created a toxic, hostile work environment. When she started at the company, everyone knew each other. As cheesy as it sounds, it was like a work family. She came into the office and knew she would always leave at the end of the day with a smile on her face and a feeling of satisfaction in her chest. The company was making progress, and it was all down to Martina and her small team of colleagues. Fast forward 5 years, and now it was all about impressing investors, meeting ridiculously high targets, and sucking up to the boss. It wasn't her scene at all. She didn't want to work in the corporate world. She didn't set out to work in a company like this. Martina had just walked out of a team meeting. The stress in the room was intense. You could have cut the air with a knife. The company were not meeting their insane targets, and the pressure was starting to mount. Martina didn't take kindly to being shouted at like she was a naughty child. She was an adult and wanted respect from her peers. She tried to reassure the team leader that everything was on track and that they were doing everything asked of them, but the product they were trying to sell was simply far too expensive. The team leader didn't take kindly to the critique and started a tirade of abuse centered solely on Martina. Not one to back down, Martina stood up for herself and then promptly walked out of the room before she said something she might later regret. Her co-workers looked on in disbelief. She was normally so centered and calm. They had a newfound respect for their hard-working colleague. Martina didn't feel inside like she might have appeared on the outside. She felt like a duck, calm on the surface but paddling away underneath. She was scared of what the repercussions might be after her outburst. She hadn't shouted or raised her voice. She had just shared her concerns for the company and the direction in which it was taking. All the investors cared about was making their money. They didn't care about the customers or the staff anymore, and it hurt Martina to think she was now just another number. It wasn't that she wanted to feel like a big fish in a small pond. She just wanted respect for her and her fellow colleagues. She wanted to come to work and know she was going home at the end of each day, having helped people. Now she just felt like all she did was try and sell a substandard product to people who might not even want it. The role didn't align with her values at all. Martina washed her hands in the cold water. She'd heard that if you run cold water on your wrists, it can calm you down. It didn't appear to be working. She dried her hands, took a deep breath, and walked back to her desk. The office was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone else was still in the team meeting, but Martina couldn't face it. She opened her laptop and began to write a letter. She had been thinking about leaving the company for a while. She was so unhappy that she had made a conscious effort over the last 6 months to save half of her wages. She now had enough savings to last her for 3 months of being unemployed. She hoped that in that time she would find something new. A few recruiters had tried to poach her, so she knew the interest was there. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she began to write her resignation letter. Martina couldn't abide conflict. As the company had grown, so had the number of arguments that occurred. People would shout and swear at each other. No one had any respect. This was not the work environment for her anymore. She knew her team would be gutted if she left, but she had to think of herself and what she wanted. Besides, if they wanted to keep in touch, they could. She often met the team to play tennis or board games on the weekend. She wrote the letter quickly and explained her reasons for leaving. In all honesty, she had already prepared much of what she wanted to say. She had wanted to write this letter for a long time, but needed that extra push. It seemed her team leader screaming at her for simply having an opinion was the last straw. She printed off the letter, signed it, took an envelope from the stationery cupboard, and waited. The suspense was too much. She walked up and down the office multiple times. What were they doing in there? Then, suddenly, there was a click of the office door, and out came her colleagues looking drained, stressed, and pale. No doubt they'd been lumbered with even more work and targets. Martina saw her team leader. "Get in here now, Martina. I want a word with you," they bellowed across the office. "And I want a word with you too," she confidently announced. She walked into the office with her head held high. She had built the department to what it was today. She wasn't going to stand for someone coming in and making her feel worthless. It wasn't on. Before her team leader could speak, she handed them the envelope. "Here, my notice, effective immediately. I have 4 weeks' notice period and enough holiday left to cover it. If you remember, since you started, you haven't allowed any of us to take our leave. So now I am. Goodbye." She turned on her heel, collected her bag, and left. Martina felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. No more daily conflicts, no more petty arguments, and no more narcissistic managers. She knew the road ahead might be tough, but it couldn't possibly be any worse than what she'd had to endure recently. There was more to life than working in a toxic office for 40 hours a week. It was time for her to find some peace and clarity. Have you ever been in a similar situation to Martina? If so, how did you cope with a toxic work environment? Tell us in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this lovely English story. Thank you for stopping by. And don't forget to like, subscribe and share. See you soon.